They chose their favorite child and left me behind alone, abandoned, and forgotten. Years of pain, struggle, and silence shaped me into someone they never expected. When they returned broken and desperate, I faced the past I survived and the family who lost me. This is my truth, and I want to share my story with you. I remember the exact second my world ended. It wasn't a slow fade or a creeping darkness. It was a sharp crack like a windshield shattering all at once. I was 12 years old, sprawled on the living room carpet, trying to coax life into a battered old Game Boy I'd found at a yard sale. My sister Olivia sat beside me, her eyes already glinting with the attention she was born to command. While I fiddled with wires and scratched cartridges, she flipped through a picture book about ballet. Our parents hovered over her, leaning in to praise every pirouette she made up on the spot, calling her their little angel. I leaned back, shut my eyes, and felt the first silent hiss of being invisible. They said, "Your brother's future is in ballet. That's where we see her greatness." As if I were a chair they were tired of cleaning around. Me, I was the gutter trash they de-step over to get to something shiny. Favorite child syndrome in its purest form. Every school concert, every recitals, every A-plus assignment of hers got a standing ovation at the dinner table, while I nursed my chicken nuggets in the corner. I started to believe I was nothing but a placeholder, a warm body they tolerated until something better came along. I tried to talk to them once, voice shaking, asking why they never seemed to see me. My mother stood up, eyes cold as steel, and said, "You're too much work, you need guidance you don't want." My father nodded. "Your sister has hope, you're just you." That was the first glimpse of the knife twisting in my gut, but nothing prepared me for the plunge. The day they left was a Wednesday. I'll never forget because the sky had the sickly color of old tin and it drizzled rain that smelled like wet cardboard. I woke up to an empty bed beside me. My sister had already gone to her early morning class at some prestigious dance studio they'd enrolled her in. I padded down the hallway, half asleep, and found the front door wide open. Rainwater pooled in the hall and my parents' car was gone. There was a note on the kitchen counter in my mother's handwriting: "We can't do this anymore. We had to choose. We chose Olivia. You'll be fine. Love, Mom and Dad." That moment, I felt my heart stutter and break all at once. There was no apology, no hesitation, no second thought. Just that line about choosing Olivia, as if I were a menu option they'd rejected. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't stay in the house. Every corner reminded me of their empty praise, their quick dismissals. I grabbed my little hiking backpack, stuffed in the few clothes I owned along with the Game Boy that still didn't work, and stepped out into the rain. The front porch light flickered above me, and I remember thinking, this is what it feels like when everything you know collapses. I walked until my shoes were soaked, until my throat hurt from swallowing back panic sobs. I thought I'd be picked up, maybe they'd realize it was too late, but I wasn't even a thought in their minds. That night I found myself at a bus stop under a flickering neon sign, shivering, clutching a half-eaten sandwich I'd scavenged from the pantry before leaving. People walked by wrapped in umbrellas or zipped-up coats. No one looked twice at the skinny kid with tear tracks drying on his face. That was the first taste of real loneliness, knowing help wasn't coming because no one remembered I existed. I ended up in foster care the next morning. My first foster family had 2 teenage sons and an aggressive Rottweiler that snarled whenever I tried to pet him. They called me lazy for wanting to read instead of helping with chores. By the time the social worker came back for a routine visit, I'd fled again. I packed my backpack with all I had left, my Game Boy, a scratched-up notebook, and a pair of socks, and I disappeared into the gray canvas of the city. Every night, I'd sleep under an overpass or a damp park bench and dream of a home that was no longer mine. But that shattered Wednesday was the fuse that lit my life's next chapter. The moment I realized that no one would save me, I swore I would save myself. I didn't know how yet, but I knew the world owed me nothing, and I was going to take from it every scrap of dignity and strength I could. By the time Olivia got her first solo in front of a theater audience, I was already scraping together odd jobs, mowing lawns at dawn, delivering newspapers at dusk, and teaching myself coding on a library computer. My heart still ached every time I saw a ballet poster featuring a tiny, graceful silhouette. But that pain became fuel, the spark that would one day ignite a fire they'd regret ever extinguishing. I spent the next 10 years buried under layers of silence and struggle, each day a fight to keep breathing. When I turned 13, I landed in a foster home with Mrs. Ellison, a retired schoolteacher whose idea of compassion was drilling multiplication tables into me until my head throbbed. Her husband, Mr. Ellison, was a quiet man who muttered every morning about how kids these days had no work ethic. I learned early that asking for kindness was a luxury I couldn't afford. I got up at 5 every weekday to help Mrs. Ellison bake muffins for the local cafe, then hustled off to school in threadbare jeans that I'd patched with duct tape. My classmates eyed me like I was radioactive, and I never told them why I wore socks that didn't match. Books became my secret weapon. I devoured everything I could get my hands on: history, science, novels about people who started with nothing and ended up legends. Libraries were my refuges, these silent cathedrals where no one judged me for being wet-haired from the rain or for having holes in my backpack. I taught myself algebra from old textbooks on the overflow shelf, then moved on to geometry, physics, even basic programming when I stumbled on a dusty PC in the corner. Every night I stayed up past midnight, fingers trembling with exhaustion as I wrote lines of code that I barely understood, but that felt like magic. By 15, I'd mastered enough to build a simple website for a local mechanic who paid me $20. That felt like winning the lottery. With that money, I bought a used laptop and some hot meals. I discovered freelancing forums where I could sell my skills: WordPress fixes, small scripts, data entry. I juggled school, foster care chores, and paid gigs. My grades shot up because I finally cared, channeling every ounce of pain into study. I wanted a scholarship, a ticket out of the endless loop of chaos. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ellison's generosity ran thin. She chewed me out for spending library time wasting her electricity. One evening, she slammed the door so hard I thought the walls would crack. "This is not a playground, kid. You get a roof, you say thank you, and you do your chores." I nodded and retreated to my room, heart pounding with anger I could never voice. So I found another hideout, a crumbling bus shelter 2 blocks away, where the click of traffic lights and distant sirens kept me company. There, I sketched plans for apps that could help people manage their money or learn new languages. At 17, I scored a part-time job at a pizza joint, tossing dough and delivering slices under neon signs. My customers didn't know ID once lived on rain-soaked benches. They tipped me generously when I remembered to smile. With my pizza money and freelance income, I paid for community college classes: math, computer science, economics. I ate ramen every night so I could afford textbooks. I memorized test answers and coded sample programs until my eyes burned. I didn't tell anyone why I was so driven. I just kept climbing, each step a protest against the parents who deemed me worthless. Graduation day from community college felt like stepping onto a stage I'd built myself. I wore a borrowed gown and flashed a shaky grin for the camera. The scholarship offers poured in: some local tech firms, a couple of state universities. I chose the one that promised mentorship and a computer lab open 24/7. I moved into a dingy basement room with 3 other students from backgrounds as fractured as mine. We formed a chosen family, cooking cheap pasta together, trading snack packs for code reviews, and celebrating every tiny victory. A bug fixed, a test aced, a paper published online. By the time I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I'd already landed a job as a junior developer at a startup that sold cybersecurity tools. My first paycheck was direct deposited into an account I'd opened under my own name, free from foster care restrictions. For the first time, I felt a sense of quiet triumph every time my bank balance grew. I moved into a small studio apartment with a skylight that flooded daylight onto my old notebooks, the ones I'd smuggled from foster homes and libraries. I decorated the walls with art made by my chosen family: drawings, motivational quotes, a photo of us huddled around a pizza box in someone's living room. Yet even at the height of that glow, I carried a hollow ache where my past had gouged me. Every milestone — first rent check, first promotion, first trip to a city I'd never dared to dream of visiting — felt bittersweet because I had nobody worthy of the joy except these new friends who'd watched me bleed hope back to life. That's how I emerged from the wreckage my parents left behind, forged in silence, sharpened by loneliness, and fueled by the memory of that Wednesday when they chose my sister over me. I had a life now built on grit and code and midnight dreams. I was on the edge of something bigger, something they couldn't touch or cheapen. And I knew one day they'd have to reckon with the fact that the kid they abandoned became the man they could never break. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day so ordinary it seemed designed to lull you into a trance. I was in my office on the 23rd floor, watching rain blur the city lights, when the elevator pinged and brought up a trio so out of place I thought I was hallucinating. My heart thudded like a fist drum in my chest as I recognized them. My mother's gaunt frame swallowed in an oversized coat, my father's shoulders bowed under years of regret, and Olivia, no longer that golden-favored star, but a pale shadow with hollow eyes and ragged jeans. They looked like refugees of their own choices, haunted versions of the people who once had everything. My mother's once perfect hair was a frizzy mess, her lips cracked. My father's tie hung untied around his neck, stained with coffee rings and what looked like dried tears. Olivia's backpack was slung crooked over one shoulder, and I noticed she clutched something small and broken, a point shoe, its ribbons frayed. It was like they'd watched my success from afar while life chewed them up and spat them back out. I froze, gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles went white. My mind raced through every script I'd written, every line of code I'd perfected, every pizza slice I'd flipped as if I could condense decades of effort into this single moment of reckoning. They weren't just random beggars at my door. They were the people who'd abandoned me when I was 12, who'd watched me vanish into a system designed to erase me. My assistant Jenna hovered by the door, mouth open. She was 6 months away from her first Broadway show, and she'd never seen me at a loss for words. I managed to clear my throat and stand, smoothing my shirt. "Can I help you?" I said, voice steady but cold. My mother swallowed, stepping forward. We need your help," she said, voice so small it seemed pinned by years of shame. "We've fallen on hard times. Olivia's, she tried everything. Your dad lost his job. I had to leave the salon. We have nowhere else to turn." I recognized the rehearsed lines of entitlement, the way they framed me as their savior, even after they'd written me off as garbage. Olivia lifted her chin, eyes filled with a pleading emptiness I'd never seen from her before. For a flicker of a second, I saw the little ballerina I'd envied, then remembered how she danced on my heart. Jenna's gaze darted between us. I motioned her out of earshot. She closed the door softly behind her. I turned back, heart hammering. Inside, the office still gleamed with the trophies of my life, certificates, photos of me at tech conferences, a sleek award for Innovator of the Year. Life had been good to me, but it was mine alone. My father ran a trembling hand over a framed photo of my first startup pitch night which hung on the wall. "We know we hurt you," he said, voice cracking. "But we're begging. Can you spare some money, a place to stay, anything?" I felt a surge of something dark and electric. Empathy warred with rage. I thought of every night I'd slept on cold floors, of the shame of calling shelters and being turned away, of the silent whisper in my gut telling me I'd never be good enough for them. And here they were, expecting me to drop everything. I walked around my desk and stopped a foot from my father. He flinched, as if a ghost had materialized in front of him. "You think this is a charity?" I asked, voice low. "You think because I climbed out of the wreckage you made that I owe you anything?" My mother's lip quivered. Olivia's point shoe slipped from her hand and hit the marble floor with a pathetic thud. The sound echoed like a gavel. "No," I said, and the word was colder than ice. "You owe me everything." My father opened his mouth, faltered, closed it again. My mother's eyes pleaded for mercy, but I wasn't her little boy anymore. I had a family that chose me, a circle of friends who'd heard my story and stayed. I had a career built on long nights and broken dreams, on turning pain into code and ambition into reality. I held up a hand. "Get out," I said, "and don't come back." They stood there stunned as I pointed toward the elevator. My heart pounded, but there was a fierce calm in my chest, a sense of justice carved out of a lifetime of struggle. They turned without another word, moving like broken puppets toward the doors. When the elevator swallowed them, I watched the doors slide shut, cutting off their ragged pleas. I closed my eyes, breathing in the hum of the office, computers whirring, lights blinking. The storm outside had eased. Rain trickled down the windows, washing away the grime of the city below. That day, I realized I was no longer a ghost in my own life. I was the man I'd forged in silence, and I answered to no one. Their faces would haunt me, but their demands would not define my future. I turned back to my desk, ready to continue building the world I deserved, one line of code at a time. They didn't disappear cleanly. A week after I'd shut the elevator doors on them, I started getting messages. First an email from my mother, subject line, "Sorry." Then a text from Olivia, "Can we talk?" And finally a package dropped on my doorstep, a small wooden box lacquered and polished with my initials carved into the lid. Inside was a faded Polaroid of me at 10, grinning with a lopsided grin, standing beside my dad and sister in matching Halloween costumes. Along the edges someone had written in neat script, "We miss you, please forgive us." I felt the old pull in my chest, the urge to look deeper, to soften. For a moment I wondered if I was losing my edge, letting that void of childhood loneliness trick me into hope. But I'd spent years welding my heart shut against exactly this, sentimental traps. I stared at the photo, felt the slick of tears that used to come so easily, and pitched the box into the recycling bin. They tried again the next day. A courier arrived with fresh flowers, white lilies my favorite, or so the note claimed. "I know I have no right," my mother wrote in a card, "but I'm trying, I want to understand." Underneath, scribbled in shaky ink, were 2 lines, "Please call me." I crumpled the card and threw it out the window. Yet they persisted. Emails, texts, voicemails dripping with feigned concern. "Did I miss the family reunion? Are you eating properly? What's new with work?" Olivia even shared a link to a news article about a ballet scholarship she supposedly won. My inbox flooded with screenshots of her rehearsals, interviews with sympathetic teachers praising her resilience. It was all performance, each message crafted to tug at some buried chord of guilt. I watched them try to dress up their desperation in warm words and stage smiles on video calls. Olivia's image on the screen glowed too bright, her hair perfectly coiffed, makeup dusted to hide under eye shadows. She laughed at my jokes, asked about my health, praised my latest product launch. My parents chimed in, carefully synchronized, "Yes, honey, and we're so proud of you." It felt like watching ventriloquists feeding different lines to the same puppet. One evening they invited me to dinner at a mid-range Italian restaurant, promising an honest heart-to-heart. I walked in alone and found them already seated, looking almost normal. My mother's eyes were glassy and my father's tie was tight for once. Olivia reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I am so sorry," she said, voice quivering. "We never realized what we put you through." My first instinct was to scoff. Then she handed me a thick envelope. "We don't expect you to forgive us," she said, "but just hear us out." Inside were pages of printed testimonials, therapists who'd seen my parents for family counseling, letters from distant relatives claiming my abandonment was a tragic misunderstanding, a doctor's note about my mother's postpartum depression at my birth. It was a dossier meant to justify their past and rewrite history. They talked around it, how they'd struggled financially, how dad's business collapsed, how mom's salon burned down. They spun sob stories. My sister's knees were wrecked from too much dancing, she'd had to quit and was going through therapy. They spoke of car accidents, hospital bills, eviction notices. Every tear they shed, every flinch of guilt they performed was aimed at me handing over my hard-earned cash or at least dropping all charges so they could re-enter my life. I ate my pasta in silence, the clatter of forks aching in my ears. Finally, I set down my fork and looked at them. "This," I said, voice low, "is a sales pitch." Their faces flickered, hurt, surprise, then a quick recalculation. "No," my mother whispered, "we just—" But I cut them off. "You left me to sleep in parks, bounce between strangers' homes, scrounged for change in dumpsters. You never came looking, never checked up. And now you plaster my inbox with manipulations and tear sheets, hoping I'll reopen the gates." My words were quiet, but they rang through the restaurant like gunshots. My father's face paled and Olivia's fake composure broke. "We're sorry," she mouthed, but it lacked the weight of shame. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single Polaroid, the one from the box, holding it between us. "This was a bait," I said, tossing it back onto the table, "and every text since has been another noose." I stood, paid my bill, and walked out, leaving the murmurs of my stunned family behind. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, cold and insistent. I felt the familiar shiver, but it wasn't the fear of being alone. It was the fire of knowing that love forced through manipulation isn't love at all. I pressed my face into the storm, crying out a laugh that tasted of relief. They can send flowers, letters, dossiers, and sure, they might drape themselves in remorse, but I won't fall for it. I'm done forging forgiveness for someone else's convenience. I'll build my family on truth, not cheap illusions. And if they really want in, they'll have to face the pain they caused, not just sell me another sob story. Because I learned long ago, the only love I owe them is the cold justice of my silence. I should have known the love bombing would crash into something uglier. 2 days after the dinner ambush, I received a calendar invite on Outlook. "Family discussion, please join us." The location was my apartment. My heart sank, this was no friendly chat. I deleted the invite, but it reappeared, pinging like an itch I couldn't scratch. Finally, I accepted, steeling myself for whatever performance they'd cook up next. That evening, I unlocked my front door to find them spread across my living room like squatters staking a claim. My sleek sofa was half hidden under dusty blankets, and there were shopping bags of groceries piled on my coffee table, milk, eggs, pasta, plus a stack of eviction notices that looked like props from a theater set. My mother hovered by the window, tugging on my curtains so they hung in crooked folds. Dad was rifling through my kitchen cabinets, his fingers nudging my spice collection as if he owned the place. Olivia sat cross-legged on my floor, clutching a worn suitcase. I flicked on the lights. "What's going on?" I asked, voice calm but my pulse hammering. My mother turned, cheeks flushed. "We need help," she said, but her eyes gleamed with something sharper than desperation. "You have the space and we have nowhere else to go." My father nodded, sweeping a hand toward the clutter they'd dumped. "We've sold everything, our house, the salon equipment, even Dad's old car. We're broke, lost." He sounded rehearsed, but his words landed like bricks in my chest. Olivia's suitcase burst open, revealing a stack of certificates, half-finished ballet programs, a faded college diploma in creative writing, a few copies of a self-published poetry chapbook that hadn't sold. She looked up, eyes damp. I need time to rebuild," she said softly. "And you're the only one who can give it." My living room spun, a gallery of their failures staged as proof I owed them my life. I swallowed. "Let me get this straight," I said. "You want to move in rent-free indefinitely, you want me to pay your debts, eviction fees, therapy bills, credit card balances." Dad ran a shaky hand through his hair. We have no credit anymore, you're our only shot. I walked over to my couch, lifting the blanket to reveal the leather beneath. I sat hard, facing them as if they were intruders in my own home, which technically they were. You threw me out when I was a kid, I said. Left me with nothing. I survived on park benches and library floors. I earned every bit of this. I gestured at the room, the awards on the shelf, the laptop on the coffee table, the sleek bike by the window. This life isn't your fallback plan. My mother's face crumpled. We're family, she whispered. It's what families do. I laughed, a bitter sound. Family doesn't abandon you, then demand a bailout. Family doesn't vanish for years and reappear when it suits them. I felt a cold clarity I hadn't known I had. I've supported myself since I was 13. I never asked for a dime from any of you. Olivia rose, trembling. We're so sorry. We please just a little help. We don't need much. Dad found a worn chair and sank into it, dropping his head between his hands. We need everything, he said flatly. Everything, there it was, the naked truth. They weren't here for apologies or closure or even to make amends. They wanted to live off me, indefinite lodgers in the house I'd built out of pain. I felt my chest tighten. For a moment I flashed back to the kid I'd been, lonely, scared, ready to forgive for a crumb of attention. But that boy was gone. I stood, crossing my arms. I don't do charity, I said. If you move in, you pay rent, market rate, or you figure it out yourselves. If you have debts, you deal with them. If you'd just rather stay, we draft a lease. I'll even find you a roommate, but you will not turn my home into your grievance shelter. My mother's lips quivered, tears pooling in her eyes. Dad lifted his head, anger flickering. You're heartless, he spat. I shook my head. I'm honest. I pay for my home, I pay my taxes, I pay my debts. You can do the same. Silence bled through the room. Olivia's suitcase sat open, waiting for instruction. I watched my family, the very people who broke me, try to make me their bank and landlord. Finally, my mother stood. She grabbed Olivia's arm. We'll look elsewhere, she said, voice brittle. Dad shoved off the chair. Don't think this is the end, he muttered. They filed toward the door, leaving the eviction notices and takeout bags scattered on my floor. I closed the door behind them and leaned against it, breathing in the hum of empty space. It was quiet, a luxury I hadn't felt in years. I walked through my apartment, gathering the bags into a box. I set the eviction notices on top along with their travel-worn suitcases. Then I dragged the box to the edge of my balcony and dropped it over. Papers fluttered like frightened birds as they scattered on the street below. I locked the balcony gate and stepped back inside. I poured myself a drink and settled onto my couch with a sense of relief so fierce it stung. They tried to guilt me, manipulate me, make everything I built into their lifeline, but I stood my ground. I wasn't heartless, I was free, and I intended to keep it that way. I didn't slam the door. I left it open, shook my head, and invited them back into the living room like I was giving them one final audition. They shuffled in, faces pale and tight, expecting concessions or tears. Instead, I sat down on the armchair, steepled my fingers, and waited. My mother sank onto the couch first, sinking into the cushions like she'd been promised refuge. My father stood stiff as a soldier, hands stuffed into his pockets. Olivia perched on the edge of a footstool, legs folded, gaze flicking between us. They braced themselves as if for a sales pitch or another apology. They didn't know I was there to unload the entire docket of their sins. Before you ask again, I began, voice soft but unforgiving, I'm going to tell you exactly why I'll never owe you anything. I saw my mother's lips part, her eyes glisten. I waited until she tried to speak, then raised a hand. Not yet. I leaned forward. I was 12 and you left me on the porch in the rain, note in hand. We chose your sister. I stumbled through the streets soaked, starving, thinking maybe you'd return. You didn't. I saw my father flinch. Olivia's face tightened as if she suddenly realized she'd been complicit. Then I went to foster homes, I said, ticking off each memory like ledger entries. One family locked me in a basement for sneaking into the fridge. Another fed me cold beans from a can and blamed me for the broken stove. Some nights I slept in church pews because social services didn't have room. My voice didn't waver, but my chest burned. Do you know what it feels like to be legal property of the state, to be tossed between strangers who called you that kid and never learned your name? My mother's cheeks flushed and she swallowed hard. I let her react before moving on. I taught myself algebra on library computers. I delivered pizza at midnight, code at dawn. I ate ramen while you threw money at ballet recitals for Olivia, telling her she was your future while I was your garbage. I watched the color drain from my sister's face. My father's jaw clenched. We were going through hard times, he muttered. I laughed, a short, bitter bark that startled even me. Hard times? You were comfortable enough to hire private coaches and limousine Olivia to every competition. You had gas money for recitals, dresses stitched with sequins. But when I needed you, you vanished. Olivia's eyes stung with tears. She looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. I didn't know. I held up my hand. You did. You saw me leave for the bus station with a backpack and no goodbye. You have no excuse. I leaned back, letting the weight of silence settle. All those years I clawed my way out of hell you made. I built a life on nothing but late nights and stubborn hope. I earned every dollar in my bank account, every award on my shelf, every inch of this apartment. I gestured around the room. My mother's voice trembled. We're sorry. Sorry doesn't rent an apartment, I said. It doesn't pay for therapy or textbooks or scraped knees. I glanced at Olivia's bare shoes. She quit ballet because her knees gave out, pain you sold as dedication. My sister flinched, but I kept going. I got a scholarship while you were busy polishing trophies for her. I studied computer science while you sent Olivia to conservatories. I worked my ass off so no one would ever toss me aside again. My father sagged onto the couch, arms dangling. We thought you'd be fine, he whispered. That was your plan, I said. Your plan was to wash your hands of me. I stood, looking down at them like a judge delivering a verdict. So hear this, I owe you nothing. Your debts, moral, financial, emotional, aren't mine to pay. I paused, letting the words sink in. My success is mine. Every line of code, every promotion, every friendship built on mutual respect, none of it came from you. My mother's shoulders shook. Olivia covered her face. My father raised his head, eyes raw. I softened my tone just enough. I'm not a monster for refusing to help. I'm holding up a mirror. Look at the mess you made, the kid you abandoned. Then look at me standing here unbroken. I survived despite you, not because of you. They sat in stunned silence, the room echoing with the truth I laid bare. I took a deep breath, feeling something lift inside me. Now leave, I said quietly, and don't come back. They rose slowly as if waking from a painful dream. My sister brushed her eyes and shuffled past me. My parents lingered, searching my face for a crack of mercy. I gave them none. When the door clicked shut behind them, I exhaled, collapsing onto the armchair. The apartment felt impossibly quiet. My sanctuary had been cleansed of ghosts. I closed my eyes, my heart thudding with relief. In that stillness, I realized I was free at last. They had met the mirror of truth, and I'd finally broken their hold on me. They did not take rejection quietly. Within 24 hours of my mirror of truth speech, my phone exploded. First came the texts from unknown numbers, threats laced with profanity. We'll expose you for the neglect you did. Everyone'll know your lies. Don't think we won't ruin your precious reputation. Then the emails. Drafts of a blog post my sister claimed she'd be publishing, titled The Monster I Call Brother, full of half-truths and wild accusations about cruelty I'd supposedly inflicted on them. By evening, my social media feeds were filling with tags. Friends pinged me screenshot after screenshot of a Facebook post from a fake account claiming I'd stolen from my needy parents, that I'd cut off my own flesh and blood for greed. Comments piled on. How dare I? Karma's a bitch, they said. I watched my notifications spin like a tornado of lies. I tried to ignore it, telling myself this was just the aftershock of a breakup they couldn't accept. But then came the phone calls. A man claiming to be a lawyer for the Hollingsworth family threatened to sue me for defamation if I didn't take down what they described as family communications, meaning my own memories shared in private messages to distant relatives. A self-appointed vigilante on Twitter demanded I prove I hadn't burned down my parents' old salon, an event that had happened years before I'd even regained contact. Meanwhile, Olivia flooded my email with crying selfies and pleas for attention. I just need one text back, she wrote. I'm really struggling, do you have any money? The guilt trip stung, but I refused. I deleted every message without a glance. Then the final blow, a public post on a neighborhood message board. It claimed I'd hoarded the family's inheritance, some supposed trust fund they said was set aside for me and my sister, and that I'd forged documents to claim it all. They'd attached scanned images of supposed bank statements and a will, doctored so crudely the fonts didn't match. Even so, victims believed it. My next job interview invited awkward questions about family scandals. A vendor I'd worked with for years hesitated to sign a contract. I realized they were unleashing an extinction burst, the last desperate tantrum before acceptance. Their threats were empty. No lawyer ever called back, the bank statements were forgeries, and nobody actually had rights to any inheritance. But slander stung. It spread faster than truth. I sat at my desk, hands shaking, hearing the howling of lies in my head. My code repository notifications pinged sporadically. Some colleagues had seen the rumors. A trusted friend sent a private message. Are you okay? People are talking. I felt the familiar hollow pit of loneliness, but this time I refused to let it swallow me. I had fought worse. I drafted a public statement of my own, concise, factual, unemotional. I posted it across my platforms. All allegations circulating about me are false, fabricated by disgruntled family members rejected for their misconduct. I have no inheritance, no trust fund. My success stems from personal effort. I attached a link to a legitimate accountant's letter confirming no trust fund existed in my name. Almost immediately, a few friends reshared it. My manager at the startup sent an encouraging email. My inbox started to settle. The tornado of lies weakened as logic and proof cut through. The trolls who'd piled on began to disappear. But the family's extinction burst wasn't over. I got a final message from my sister. "You've destroyed us, you're all that matters, you left us for dead and now you want us erased." Beneath it, a photo of my old elementary school blurred and posted at night, implying I'd stalked them. I breathed in, feeling the weight of every furious word. Then I did something surprising. I replied, not with emotion but with a single sentence, "Goodbye." I pressed send and blocked their numbers, their emails, their fake accounts. I emptied my recycle bin, no more scraps for them to twist. And something settled inside me, a clarity forged in the fury they unleashed. Their final tantrum had shown exactly who they were: liars, manipulators, people willing to destroy the truth for their own needs. They had no loyalty, no love, only entitlement and spite. I stood in the center of my apartment, turned off my phone and looked around. My life wasn't ruined, it was resilient. The slander had bruised me, but it hadn't broken me. This was the end of their story. I closed the blinds against the evening light and opened my laptop, letting the quiet hum of my code editor wash over me. In that stillness, I realized the extinction burst was their swan song. They had tried everything: love bombing, guilt, threats, slander, and failed. My truth stood unshaken. They could scream into the void, but I owned the narrative now. And I intended to write the next chapter on my own terms. I woke up the next morning to silence, a rarity in a life once filled with chaos. My phone lay on the nightstand, screen dark and peaceful. I didn't have any new messages, no enraged voicemails, no social media alerts. I realized it was the first quiet morning since they reappeared. That stillness reminded me of a gift I hadn't allowed myself, the gift of nothing. I sat on the edge of my bed and pulled open my laptop. I drafted a restraining order request detailing every threat, every false post, every manipulative message they'd sent. I attached proof: the screenshots of slanderous social media posts, the forged documents, the lawyer threats that never materialized, and the final message from my sister declaring I had erased them. I signed it with my full name, then hit submit. The clerk emailed me confirmation: "Your request for a protective order has been filed." That legal notice felt like a door slamming shut on their chapter of my life. I called the courthouse to schedule a hearing. The clerk gave me the date and time. It was a few weeks away, but the temporary order would go into effect immediately. I would be safe from any further harassment, and they would be legally barred from contacting me or coming within a set distance of my home or workplace. Once the paperwork was done, I drafted a final message addressed to my parents and my sister. I wrote it clearly, without bitterness or sarcasm, just facts and boundaries. I told them the order was necessary to protect my well-being. I reminded them that love isn't coercion, that family isn't a contract they can violate without consequences. I ended with one sentence: "I will not hurt you or expose your truths again. From this point on, you will have exactly what you gave me: silence." I sent the message from my secure email and immediately blocked their addresses. Then I cleared my phone's call history and blocked their numbers one more time for good measure. On social media, I disabled comments on all posts, limited message requests to verified contacts, and unfollowed every account associated with their names. I felt a profound satisfaction, as if I had erased an ugly stain from my world. All day I moved through my apartment like it was a sanctuary reborn. I brewed coffee in my favorite mug, the one with a chip on its rim that reminded me nothing had to be perfect to be meaningful. I opened the blinds and let the sunlight flood in. I walked around, touching the smooth surface of my desk, the spines of my favorite books lined neatly on the shelf. For the first time in years, I felt a breeze of genuine ease. That afternoon, I went for a run through the park where I'd slept as a kid, under that old oak tree. I ran past the bench where I used to figure out algebra, past the library steps where I drowsed with textbooks on my lap. Now I was a man who sprinted for fitness instead of escape, who stopped to catch his breath in the light of day rather than shiver in the dark. Every footfall felt like a celebration of how far I'd come. When I returned home, I poured myself a drink and settled onto my balcony. I watched as city lights began to flicker on one by one like stars waking in the dusk. My phone sat inside, silent. The buzzing that had been my constant companion, angry notifications, pleading texts, was gone. In its place was a soft hum of evening traffic and the distant call of a night bird. I thought about the years I'd spent building this life, teaching myself code in borrowed labs, delivering pizzas in the rain, surviving on library air and fierce determination. I remembered the pain of abandonment and the bitter lessons of false love. And now I realized I was gifting myself that same emptiness they'd given me for so long: absolute silence. Silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was space to breathe, to grow, to exist without fear. It was a boundary drawn in stone around my soul, a promise I made to myself that I would no longer trade my peace for someone else's comfort. I closed my eyes and let the quiet wash over me. Behind me lay the storm of their demands and slanders. Ahead lay nothing but possibility, the kind of nothing that hums with potential. And in that moment, I understood that this stillness was the greatest gift of all.